Hi everyone, today we are going to be looking at my unfamiliar activity analysis, which I decided to do planting carrot seeds. This is usually done outdoors around this time in the Pacific Northwest, so I thought it'd be a good idea for my unfamiliar activity analysis. So the activity description is going to be planting carrot seeds in an outdoor garden bed. The activity is going to begin with materials next to the garden bed and ends when the seed is planted, covered, watered, and ready to grow. So the areas of occupation, for myself, it's an IADL because it's home establishment and management, falls under the gardening criteria. But again, this can depend on the person who's actually doing the gardening. It could also fall under work, leisure, or social participation areas, depending on where their garden is, such if it was at a community garden plot, there would be a lot more interaction happening. So with that, the environmental context, like I just mentioned, if you're at a community garden setting, you probably have your own plot there. You'd have to follow a lot more rules. The expectations would be higher to meet, such as keeping your area clean throughout the year. There'd also be more people to interact with. This can also fall under if you're part of a gardening club. It would also change kind of the context of which you are doing this activity. Another example of environmental context would be the type of garden bed you're using. So there's some that are super raised up and they're actually up to your chest. So this would change kind of the body functions needed to perform this task versus if it's a raised bed on the ground or if you're planting straight into the ground as well. So all these are things to consider when you're doing this activity. Another thing for context would be personal and cultural context. So it's important to think about the client's relationship to food and or the earth. So what is the purpose of their gardening? How do they view food in general? Is a carrot something that they only use for special occasions, such as Thanksgiving? Is it something that they don't usually use? Are they trying to eat healthier, so they want to learn how to plant carrots? So there's a lot of things to consider personally about their client's relationship with the food and what you're planting. So objects needed for this, you need the carrot seeds themselves, gardening gloves, kind of optional but highly recommended, gardening rake or spade, super helpful, and then some kind of watering can or hose to make sure you can water your carrot seeds. So another thing would be space and social demands. So and safety concerns. With space demands, you're going to need an area to actually do the gardening. If you're at home, you'll need some kind of space probably in your yard so it's sunny, you can get some rain. If you're at a community garden, you'll probably need an approved planting area or plot of land. Same with a gardening club, you'll need some kind of land to plant on as well. Another space demand you could think of, it's probably good to do it on a non-rainy weather day. It would make it really hard to plant your seeds because you're not planting them that deep and the wet soil will make them sink a little deeper. For social demands, there's not really any social demands unless you're at a community garden or at a garden club, because then you may need to interact with others or pay dues and just be friendly around there. Safety concerns, you have sharp tools you're using with. If you have poor posture and your garden bed is not one that's raised all the way up to your chest, then you're going to be doing a lot of bending to make sure the soil is ready and planting the seeds. So make sure you have good posture. And then lastly, sun exposure could be an issue as well when you're planting outside. So we have our step-by-step process here. So first we're putting on our gardening gloves. We're grabbing the rake or spade. We're raking the planting area to loosen up about the top 4 to 5 inches of soil that you can see I'm doing in the video. We want to make sure you're removing any weeds or rocks or old plant roots that were loosened up. This is going to cause your carrots not to grow very well. So if you want them to continue to grow and not just planting them, then you can see I'm removing some old plant roots that were in the process there as well. So to continue the process, you are going to be using one finger to punch a hole 1/4 an inch deep in the soil, which is not very deep at all. It's very actually hard to get 1/4 of an inch. You're definitely going to get 1/2 an inch at least. So you're going to make the holes 3 to 4 inches away from each other so the carrot has room to grow. So once you've made the first hole, you'll make the second hole, and you're going to repeat this process to your desired length of row for planting. So you can see in the picture, I have made my holes 3 to 4 inches apart. They're definitely a little deeper than 1/4 an inch, but that is okay. So then our next step is we're going to be taking a carrot seed and putting it into the first hole. So once you put the first carrot seed in, you're going to repeat those steps so you can see that each of these holes does have a carrot seed inside of it. You're going to cover each seed with a little bit of soil from the garden bed, and then you're going to water each spot with the watering can or hose, whatever you have, just to give them a little moisture to start growing. And then lastly, you can clean up the area so that there's no debris or anything around so your carrots can grow happily. So this process and does involve some body functions. Some of the ones I picked out were attention to focus on which holes had seeds and which ones still needed seeds, memory of which seeds were planted and where they were, because once you cover them up with soil, it's kind of hard to figure out where those holes were to water them. You definitely need energy if you're working with a whole garden plot. You're bending over a lot, grabbing different tools, pulling out roots and rocks, so you definitely need some energy to do it. You need some visual function to be able to determine the spacing between each of the holes, so it's kind of hard to get 3 to 4 inches between each of the holes in order to plant the seeds. And lastly, you need good cardiovascular system functions to have proper circulation during the gardening process to not get too hot from the sun. Just a few of the body structures required were structures related to movement, to move around the garden box, related to cardiovascular, immunology and respiratory systems to not get overheated, have good circulation, and lastly related to eyes and ears to stay balanced as you are bent over working on the garden box, as well as seeing the distance between where you put the holes for the seeds. Some of the performance skills you would needed that were motor would be stabilizing, so you can move along the garden box while grabbing seeds for each hole. You need to align so you're not leaning on the garden box for support, so you can stabilize there in the line. Reaching, so extending your arm to make the holes and filling the holes with the seeds. Bending, so flexing your trunk to reach the spot for the hole and seeds, as well as for raking the soil. And then gripping, so grabbing individual seed for each hole. And this is actually pretty hard to do. It took me quite a few attempts to just grab a single seed to put in each hole. So some performance skills in the processing side would be pacing, so maintaining the constant tempo to make the holes and plant the seeds in an efficient way. Carrying out the planting the seeds as intended with good spacing between would be heeds. Using the correct tool, so using the gardening rake to loosen up the soil. And then initiate would be starting the next step of making a hole to plant a seed without stopping. So the last thing we'll talk about is grading and adaptation. So it's just a few examples for each. For grading down, you could have the holes already made so that the client is just practicing putting the seed into the hole. You can also plant one seed or fewer rows instead of a whole garden plot. To grade up, you could start the activity from prepping the garden bed even more. So coming out of winter, since carrot seeds are planted usually one of the first seeds to be planted, the garden bed's a little more of a mess, so it takes more time to clean it up. You could also have the garden bed not be raised, which would cause more body movement and bending and alignment. And then for adapting, you could plant the seed in a small pot on a table inside and then take it outside, or you could have them join a gardening club so they could have assistants and other people to help them along the way, just a little different environmental context. I hope you enjoyed this activity analysis, and I can't wait to talk to you about it in class.